Hi everyone, welcome to this lesson. In this lecture, we will start implementing externalized configuration microservices pattern using Spring Cloud Config Server. And in the first lecture, we will start by creating a config server repository. We will use config server repository to start holding our configuration data externally. This way, as I said, we will be implementing externalized configuration microservices pattern, which is also one of the topics of 12-factor application methodology. Alright, let's now create a config server repository as a directory. And inside this directory, create two files, config client YAML and config client Twitter to Kafka YAML files. We will use config client YAML for our general application configuration logic. And we will create different YAML files for each of our microservices. As you can see in the config client, we set a general configuration where we say that we want to enable overriding the properties for Spring Cloud configuration. That means we can actually override these properties in the services itself, while we are using the configuration from the config server repository. Now we will move all the configuration defined in the Twitter to Kafka service application YAML file to this config client Twitter to Kafka YAML file. We are doing this because we will now use the configuration externally in the config server repository. We don't want to keep the configuration in the service itself. Please remember to empty the application YAML file in the Twitter to Kafka service. Otherwise, it will overwrite the configuration that you defined in the config server repository, because I configured overriding properties in the config client YAML file. We will then create a Git repository using git init command in the config server repository folder. Because config server will need a Git repository to be able to fetch the data from this folder. And then add all the changes to the Git repository using git add dot command. And finally use git commit -am initial commit command to commit all the changes in a local repository. In the next section, we will continue creating a config server as a microservice, where we will be using this repository for our config server. Alright, I will see you in the next lecture.